Hello, and welcome. Tonight, let's take a quiet journey through the colder corners of the past, into the land of ice, of wind, and of long, silent winters. You've probably heard the stories of fierce warriors in iron helmets sailing sleek longships over icy seas, of thunderous raids, dragon-headed prows, and axes crashing into shield walls. But that isn't the story we're telling tonight. Instead, imagine the other side of the Viking world, the one most people lived in, the one where the fields were stubborn, the food was plain, and the battles were fought not with swords, but with the earth itself. This is the world of the Viking farmer. Over the next minutes, we'll explore 4 gentle chapters from the Norse past. First, we'll begin with the hard, slow rhythm of daily life in a Viking village. Then we'll meet one of the last great Viking kings, ambitious, restless, and doomed. Next, we'll step into the soft silence of a burial mound and unravel the mystery of the 2 women laid to rest aboard the Oseberg ship. And finally, we'll warm ourselves inside the smoky walls of a longhouse feast, where stories swirled like mead and firelight. So, get comfortable. Breathe slowly. Let the hum of time wash over you. You don't need to stay awake for every word. History here is not a test. It's a tide. Now, let's begin our story not with warriors, but with a wooden plow scraping through frozen northern soil. Imagine, you wake up before the sun. Not that it matters much, because in the depths of the Norse winter the sun barely rises at all. The hearth has gone cold. Your breath clouds in the dim air. You pull on rough, homespun wool, thick, itchy and worn at the elbows. Outside, the wind hums low over the hills. For the ground is hard with frost, and somewhere in the stable a cow shifts in the straw, its breath steaming like yours. You are not a raider. You have no sword, no shining armor. You are a Viking, yes, but not the kind sung about in sagas. You are a farmer, and your life is a quiet struggle. The world you live in is one of narrow margins, short summers, long winters, thin soil that resists the plow like a stubborn ox. Rocks, so many rocks, always another to dig out before planting. The land is a patchwork of green in summer and grey in every other season. Here in Norway or Iceland or Denmark, depending on where your village lies, the landscape is your companion and your enemy. You work a small plot, barely enough to keep your family fed, barley and rye if the gods are kind, cabbage, turnips, leeks, all hardy crops, nothing fancy. You have sheep, if you're lucky, a pig, maybe 2, chickens that squabble, a cow that kicks. These animals are everything. You know them each by name, and you know the sound they make when they're cold, or hungry, or about to die. The chores follow the seasons. In spring, there's ploughing. You press the wooden ard into the thawing ground, walking behind the ox, your hands going numb with the chill of the handle. There are no iron ploughs here, just wood, mud, and time. In summer you sow, in autumn you reap, in winter you mend and wait, and hope. Everything is made by hand, clothing spun from your wife's loom, shoes stitched from hide cured in smoke, roofs that leak, tools that break, joints that ache. And there is no rest, not really, because always there is something that needs doing. Meals are simple. Stew, always stew. Fish if the weather's fair. Bread if the harvest was good. Sometimes dried lamb, often nothing but thin gruel. You eat what you have, you save what you can, and in winter you eat less. The whole household does. The longhouse is warmest at its center, near the fire pit where the smoke curls up through a hole in the roof. The ends of the house stay cold. There, your children sleep. Huddled under furs, shoulder to shoulder, they learn what it is to endure. At night you tell them stories, not of Odin or Thor, not always. Sometimes you just tell them about last year's summer, about that one good harvest, about the time the calf was born early and strong. Stories like that, they're the ones that keep you going. Even out here there are rules. Every few weeks you travel to the Thing, the local assembly where disputes are settled, property is judged, and community is held together. You listen to elders argue about grazing rights, about who owns which part of the stream, about debts unpaid and fences trampled, Justice is personal, and grudges last. You know your neighbors, you have to. If their roof collapses, you help. If your ox dies, you hope they'll lend theirs. Because winter does not care if you were proud. The image of the Viking as a raider is not your image. That life, sailing across the sea, risking all for silver and glory, it is for younger men, richer men, desperate men. You've never left your fjord. You may never touch a longship. You may never see a monastery or hear Latin or set foot in foreign soil. You work the land because it is what you have, and because your children need to eat. There is no saga for you, but there is rhythm, there is purpose, there is the quiet pride of survival. The roof needs patching, the well is running low, the goat is limping, the snows are coming, always there is something. But in this small world, with its predictable hardships, there is also a kind of peace. You know each season like a verse in a poem, each sound of the wind like a line from a song. And when you lay down to sleep, beneath wool and fur, with the fire dying low, you listen to the creak of the beams overhead, the breath of your animals in the stall, the quiet, constant beat of your own heart, and you think maybe tomorrow a sack will be easier. The world of the Viking farmer is not glorious, but it is real, and it is the world most Vikings lived and died in. Now, let us shift gently from these muddy fields and follow the sound of drums and swords to a very different Viking story, one of ambition, war, and a final gasp of glory. Shall we? The year is 1066. The winds of the North Sea carry whispers of battle, and a man named Harald sails toward destiny. But before he became a king, before the legend, the war, and the songs, the half-brother of a king, watching the old Viking world begin to crumble. This is the story of Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king. Harald Sigurdsson was only 15 when he watched his half-brother, King Olaf, fall in battle at Stiklestad. The sky that day was dark with arrows, axes clanged against shields, and in the middle of it, Harald, barely old enough to grow a beard, stood with sword in hand. When the battle turned, when Olaf's forces broke and scattered, Harald did not die. Instead he escaped, wounded, young, but alive. That moment, fleeing across the border, leaving behind his family and his future, was the beginning of a life unlike any other in Viking history. Harald fled east, to Kievan Rus, a vast land of forests, rivers, and silent snowfall. There he found protection under the great Prince Yaroslav, an ally to many Norse exiles. For a time he served as a mercenary, learning languages, studying tactics, watching the gears of royal courts turn in cold silence. But soon his ambitions grew, and like many restless Norsemen before him, he looked south. By the time Harald reached Constantinople, the crown jewel of the Byzantine Empire, he was no longer a boy. He was a tall, strong man with cold eyes and a calculating mind. There, he joined the Varangian Guard, an elite force of Norse warriors sworn to protect the Emperor of Byzantium. It was a strange place. Marble halls, golden mosaics, silks and spices and candles that never seemed to burn out. But Harald thrived. He fought in Sicily, in the Holy Land, even some say as far as North Africa. He grew rich, he grew feared, he grew ready, and when the time came, he left the empire behind. Years later he came home. No longer Harald the exile, but Harald Hardrada, Harald the hard ruler. He claimed the Norwegian throne by force. His rivals fell quickly or bent the knee. As king, he was strict, efficient. He rewarded loyalty and crushed rebellion. He reformed currency, built infrastructure, traded with Europe. But he never stopped thinking about glory, about conquest, about the old Viking dream. And so his eyes turned west, to England. In 1066, the English throne was in chaos. Harald saw his chance. With hundreds of longships, he crossed the sea. Allies in the north of England had promised support. Victory felt close. They won their first battle. And then came Stamford Bridge. King Harold Godwinson of England, fast and furious, arrived with a surprise attack. The Viking army was caught off guard. The battle was brutal. And at its end, and Harald Hardrada lay dead, pierced by an arrow, his dreams undone. That was the last great Viking invasion. Just days later, Harold Godwinson himself would fall at the hands of William the Conqueror at Hastings. But Harold's death marked something else, the closing chapter of the Viking Age. No more kings would rise from the fjords. No more longships would cross with raiders seeking gold and fire. The sagas were over. The time of merchants, towns, and kings in crowns, not helmets, had begun. But Harold is not forgotten. His name echoes through Norse poetry. His travels, his battles, his songs, recorded in ice and ink. And though his ambition led to his end, there's something hauntingly beautiful about it, isn't there? A man who began as a boy fleeing battle and ended as a king chasing one last victory. Not for plunder, not for revenge, but for one final taste of greatness. As the wind settles over the field of Stamford Bridge and the longships drift quietly on the tide, we leave behind the roar of kings, and now we turn to something gentler, older, still. A ship buried in the earth, 2 women laid to rest, and a mystery that still lingers in the soil. Now, let us leave behind kings and farmers. Let us drift back further, into a stiller silence. Imagine a low hill rising gently from the Norwegian earth. Beneath it, a burial mound, untouched for 1,000 years. Inside, a ship, and in the ship, 2 women, surrounded by carved wood, silk, and grave goods. This is the story of the Oseberg burial, one of the most beautiful and mysterious archaeological discoveries of the Viking world. Unearthing the past. 2 farmers near the village of Tunsberg dig into a grassy mound. Their tools strike something hard and strange. Soon, archaeologists arrive. As the soil is gently lifted away, a shape emerges. A 70-foot-long ship, perfectly preserved beneath the clay. The wood is dark, but its carvings still swirl like frozen waves. Dragons and serpents writhe across the prow. It is not a warship. It is not a trader. It is a ship for the dead. Inside, 2 women lay, side by side, wrapped in wool and silk, their bones fragile with time, but their presence undeniable. Who were they? That question remains unanswered. Surrounding the women are treasures, not gold, but things more precious in their own way. 5 intricately carved wooden animal head posts, a wooden cart with iron fittings and wheels, ornate and strange. Dozens of textiles, some woven with Eastern silk threads, tools, kitchenware, and farm equipment, even a bucket made from imported yew. These are not the possessions of simple villagers. They speak of wealth and power. Of rituals we may never fully understand. The ship itself, it is a masterpiece, built from oak, clinker planked and fastened with iron rivets, shaped not for the sea but for ceremony. The prow curls high like a serpent ready to strike, but here it sleeps, and has for over 1,000 years. Who were the women? The questions linger softly like mist on a fjord. One woman was older, perhaps in her 70s, unusual for the time. The other was younger, maybe in her 50s. They were not buried as an afterthought. This ship, this mound, this ceremony, it was all for them. Some have called them priestesses. Others believe they were queens or noble women of immense status. Perhaps they were both, or something else entirely. No swords, no shields, no spears. But their burial had more richness than many kings, and the carvings, those elegant, eerie animal heads, suggest ritual, symbolism, magic, maybe. They were remembered, and they were meant to be found. Echoes in the earth. The Oseberg ship rested undisturbed for over a millennium. The wood, the fabric, even the moss pressed against the planks, held in place by the cold Norwegian soil. And when it was uncovered, it gave us not only answers, but questions. What did these women mean to their people? What beliefs surrounded their deaths? What stories died with them, whispered only to the wind? There's something sacred about that silence, not just the mystery, but the dignity of it. Tonight, they rest again, in a museum now, under soft lights. But their journey is not over. because even now in the quiet moments of the night we remember them, and in remembering, they live. Now, as we leave the shadows of the burial mound behind, let us return to the world of the living, but not the hard, cold life of the farmer. Let us step inside a Viking chieftain's longhouse, where warmth, wealth, and storytelling still linger like smoke in the rafters. Now let the icy winds and muddy fields fade away. Let the oars fall silent on the fjord. You are no longer a poor farmer or an exiled warrior. You are a guest in the longhouse of a Viking chieftain. Here, fire crackles in a stone hearth. The rafters stretch high above, carved and dark with smoke. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, mead, and damp wool. This is a world apart. One of power, of lore, of status and story. Let us settle in just for a while. The heart of the household. The longhouse is more than just a home. It is the center of a Viking estate. Part barn, part court, part hall of memory. It might stretch 60 feet or longer. Its walls are lined with benches. On either side, retainers and servants eat and sleep. At the center sits the chieftain. He is not a king, not quite, but his word carries weight. He owns land, he commands ships, he gives gifts and expects loyalty. By day, decisions are made here, disputes settled, alliances forged. By night, the same walls echo with stories and songs, law, honor, and memory. This is a society ruled not by written law, but by memory. The chieftain presides over disputes. Witnesses speak. Oaths are sworn, sometimes on sacred rings. There is no jail. Justice is compensations or revenge. Honor is everything. To lose face in front of your kin is to fall lower than a slave. But if your words are wise, if your enemies fall silent, you rise. And all of it, every deal, every feud, is remembered, carried in the minds of those around the fire. On feast days, the longhouse comes alive, the fire burns high, drums thump softly. A skald or poet begins to speak, not loudly, not with shouting, but with rhythm, memory, and care. He tells of gods, Odin, wise and wandering, of Thor, strong and simple, of battles and sea monsters, of ancestors who outwitted death. Children listen wide-eyed, old men nod. The women who brew the mead and weave the tapestries pause to hear familiar lines. Time slows. Outside, winter presses against the walls. But here, there is warmth. The contrast of power. It is easy to forget that beyond these timbered walls, others are freezing. That the chieftain's wealth is built on the backs of those who till his soil, who serve, who obey. But the longhouse does not speak of that. There it speaks of lineage, tradition, and strength. It is a place where stories shape reality, where history is told not with dates and scrolls, but with names remembered around the fire. The long silence. And when the fire dies low and the mead runs out and even the skald goes quiet, you are left with the creak of the beams, the breath of sleeping men, the gentle hiss of embers. And in that stillness, you feel the echo of centuries. This longhouse is gone now. Its timber collapsed, its stories half forgotten. But for a while tonight you walked its floor, you heard its songs, you felt its warmth. So now we leave Viking life behind. You've stood in the mud with the farmer, marched to battle with Harald, whispered at the graveside of queens, and sat by the fire of the powerful. 1,000 years ago, they lived, they dreamed, they struggled and thrived and told stories under the same stars. And tonight you've wandered quietly among them. Sleep well.